child-free women as a demographic are actually the highest earners. We see the gender wage gap disappear. That terrible question of who's going to take care of you when you're older. That's a gut punch. Your children are going to take care of you, and the statistics show that that's not true.
If your purpose is defined by you having kids, and even then, you know that your purpose is bigger than that because you're trying to think about how do I want my kids to then contribute to society? And for someone who's child-free, sense of what contributions can I make to society?
The why we haven't had children can range from I don't want to pass on generational trauma to economics to the environment to politics to I just like my hobbies more. And if I have to choose strategically how to make the biggest impact, I chose early on that my biggest impact is going to come at a much grander scale than having one child.
Understand what to do with your financial situation, with your estate can be really heavy. How do you see that the clients that you guys work with, and even for your own self, being someone who has chosen to be child-free, how do you navigate that guilt?
I truly believe that if we can let people have space and the opportunity to really make judgments that are right for themselves, more people are going to be in alignment and this world will feel different. I think, unfortunately, the traditional life script that America has put on us, from consumerism to capitalism to all society, we're not given a lot of opportunity just to pause and evaluate if that's really what our heart truly needs as alignment.
Behind every opinion, every conflict, in every moment of courage, there is a human story longing to be understood. I'm Dr. Payal Beri, and this is Reframing Perspectives, a space for conversations that help us see ourselves and each other with more honesty and curiosity so that we can build empathy and compassion in our world. Here in these episodes, we're going to explore the layers of what it means to be human in leadership, in society, and in our everyday lives, and how by understanding those layers, it can reshape our relationships, our communities, and our impact. So let's step inside and let's begin. When we talk about legacy, they often mean children. But what if your legacy isn't who you raise, it's what you build, nurture, and even leave behind in the world? My guest today, Maddie Roche, is the Chief Growth Officer of Childfree Trust, the first of its kind fiduciary and estate planning service for people who are child-free. After a decade of helping financial advisors build thriving practices, Maddie realized that there's a growing demographic, those who choose to live child-free, are almost invisible in financial and estate planning. This conversation feels especially personal to me. We talk about emotions behind choosing to be child-free, what it means to build a life and legacy outside of traditional definitions, and why our systems still don't know how to serve people who choose those paths. But more than that, this explores what it means for our relationships, our friendships, and our communities when we expand the definition of legacy beyond bloodlines. When we start asking, how else do we give love and leave the world better than we found it? I know this episode's important to me as someone who has chosen to be child-free, but it's an incredible conversation that I really hope that you get a lot out of. Maddie, I'm so selfishly excited to have you on because what we're going to talk about is something that's so in the shadows of a conversation that needs to be talked about. And I'm so excited to dive into with you about what it means to be child-free and creating a legacy and creating, thinking about your estate, thinking still about your financial responsibility and what that looks like for you in aging, what that looks for you in health, what that looks for you, and how, as a child-free person, you exist in society. So welcome to Reframing Perspectives.
Thank you, Dr. Payal. It is so nice to be here. It is so fun to finally be here. You and I met at Podcast Movement.
Yes.
Several months ago. And I'm thankful for the invitation.
Yeah. Well, so as we dive in, I want to actually start with what was the moment for you that even got you interested in moving into talking about finances and child-free trust? What was that moment for you in your career, in your life, that made it so pivotal that you're like, I need to dedicate time and energy and my career towards this?
Yeah, good question. Thank you. For about 11 years, I was helping grow a network of financial advisors who were young, who were on the cutting edge of financial planning and working with different niches. And I was a business coach to them. So I saw hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of advisors in what they were building with their business. The only firm that ever really stood out to me around having a really specific niche was child-free wealth. And the founder, Dr. Jay Zygmunt, worked exclusively with child-free people. And I am a child child-free queer woman. And I thought, wow, that really is a niche. And he gave me a checkup on my financial picture, and it blew my mind in terms of how fundamentally different my financial picture will be because I'm not having kids. The everything from my insurance needs to what I need to do for estate planning and long-term care to how much I need to earn over the course of my life fundamentally changes because I'm not having children. And because for me, it was a choice not to have children, I want to embrace having a lot of choices in my future about how I design a unique and beautiful life that's true to me. And that kind of financial planning really opened my mind to what could be done differently. Long story short, years pass, I got to know Dr. J a bit better, and I heard what he was building around Child-Free Trust, which is the first nationwide solution for who people without kids can nominate in medical and financial POA positions, executor and trustee positions. So without going too deep into it, getting your estate planning done can be very challenging for people without kids because traditionally people will just nominate their children to be their executor or their medical power of attorney. These are the people that you need to identify to make decisions on your behalf when you can't. It was a glaring area of ripe for change in our industry. And it was a problem in the market that was not solved yet. And Jay was about to go do it. And I wanted to be part of that. And that is how Jay and I teamed up.
Wow. You brought up a couple things that just immediately just made me even more curious. You mentioned that you learned the astonishing numbers that you had to come up with for if you're going to be child-free and what that looks like for your insurance, for how much money you have to make, all of these things. Can you give us some insight into what that is in terms of what an individual has to think about? And it's wild to me to think that someone who chooses to be child-free has to actually do more and make more. And it's because so much of our policies and systems are built around family-centric model and not putting child-free individuals as even a consideration. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what those numbers are.
Sure. It's not that we have to make more or earn more. It's that we have to be strategic about our futures because we don't have the traditional next of kin built-in network. When it comes to financial planning, child-free women as a demographic are actually the highest earners. We see the gender wage gap disappear when we look at women without kids and men without kids compared to women with children and men with children. It's negligible, the difference between men and women without children. Actually, that women don't have to earn as much because many of us are deciding to die with zero, meaning I don't have an interest in leaving a legacy to any of my nieces or nephews. I don't have any yet. Yes, I want to give a lot while I'm alive. I have an interest in earning money because I have a big giving mission, part of me. But at some point, I will have earned enough that the interest alone of my nest egg of net worth will begin earning enough that I could maybe take a sabbatical. Maybe I could work and it not be about my income and at some point I'm going to start deaccumulating so that I die without millions of dollars on my accounts. As Dr. J says, if you've left this world with $3 million, you've done it wrong. You haven't spent it the way that you can when you're alive. You can make a huge impact by giving and spending while you're alive.
Wow. So you're actually talking about that the legacy doesn't necessarily have to be for once you're gone. It's about a living legacy. Exactly. And it's about creating something right now where you're able to, I think about, for example, obviously she's not child-free or anything like that, but Mackenzie Scott, she's constantly giving and giving and giving. And you hear about that. You see that she just wants to give as much away. And again, not necessarily this demographic that we're talking about, but she definitely comes to mind. But what about the individuals that do want to, leave something for their nieces and nephews, and they do want to even maybe set up a foundation, do things that go long after they've gone away?
Yeah, and absolutely. You can certainly save some to give once you pass away. But if you've earned enough over your lifetime, I would argue that there's huge impact you can have on developing foundations while you're alive, on giving to your nieces and nephews while they're young and actually need it versus waiting till they're 60 to receive an inheritance. There's a lot of tax advantages to giving while you're alive. It actually allows you to preserve more equity of your own cash to be able to give more. Disclaimer, I'm not a financial planner. I've worked with them for a very long time, so I speak the language. But I encourage anyone to do some research on what kind of setting up legacy while you're living, just as you said, how it can benefit them. And the team at Childfree Wealth can support that.
Yeah. When you talk about this, it's really interesting because it definitely brings up a lot of things where there's so many, depending on your cultural background and your family dynamic background, the social dynamics, there can be a lot of guilt that gets put onto individuals that have chosen to be child-free, or even those that maybe haven't chosen, but by unfortunate situations, they're not able to have children and they, become child-free. And so as they're navigating that, all of that emotional piece of what it means to understand what to do with your financial situation, with your estate, can be really heavy. How do you see that the clients that you guys work with, and even for your own self, being someone who is chosen to be child-free, how do you navigate that guilt?
Yeah, it's really well framed. When we speak at conferences, we have, and we didn't create it, but it's been around this child-free bingo game of all the things you shouldn't say to someone without kids. And one of those things is like, oh, well, you don't have a family. Well, yes, I do. I have a chosen family. And, how I define family is how I define family. And everything to that terrible question of who's going to take care of you when you're older. I mean, that's a gut punch. That's assuming that your children are going to take care of you. And the statistics show that that's not true. So there is a huge amount of bias in the world. And I'm absolutely not ever going to argue that women shouldn't have maternity leave and parents should have generous parental leave. But when you start thinking about kind of equity in the workplace around people who've chosen not to have children, there is a lot there that can be explored. And when you bring up guilt, I think it's really important, and it's hard not to bring politics into this as much as I wish to not think about politics. In 2025, it's become quite political for a woman to choose not to have children. We're seeing lawsuits happen across the country, challenging not just marriage equality, but the questions of willful childlessness was a lawsuit that was filed in Texas. We have the Heritage Foundation trying to protect the traditional family structures. So, we're feeling the pressure from a number of ways when really I find both, and on a number of fronts, my lifestyle to be kind of a very rebellious and revolutionary, decision that I'm making to not reproduce. And it's someone's total individual right to decide that, just as it's your own right to decide to have a child. So the guilt is prevalent. And I just encourage people to remember some of the undertones of the questions around it. Like, oh, are you going to be lonely? Or, things like that. Because as a child-free woman, I have a huge amount of options for how I get to live life.
A lot of times there's these double standards that we know to be sensitive to not asking questions of someone who just got married of when are you going to have babies and when are you going to have kids, or once they have their first and it's like, when are you going to have your second? Because they may be having their own challenges, whatever that may be, but that graciousness is not necessarily happening on the flip side to women who are single or women who are, choosing to be child-free. What do you think needs to happen in our everyday conversations, in allyship, to start shifting that in our society, to recognize that being child-free may be a choice, or it may be something that is an unfortunate choice for someone who may have wanted it. And now you're just kind of harboring this judgment.
Yeah. Really well framed. I think a lot of people don't recognize that 25% of Americans don't have kids. The most recent Michigan study came out. It mimics the U.S. population. Nearly 5% of that 25 are folks that are childless by circumstance. And we cannot stress enough the difference between a woman who's choosing not to have children and a woman who is possibly mourning and grieving the life she thought she would live. There's no judgment on either side, but they are separate types of individuals kind of under this umbrella of a growing demographic. So to your point, I think it starts early that, so many of us are given this traditional life script that, you go to school, you go to college, maybe you meet your husband in college. And while you were young, you were holding and cradling babies if you were a girl and dressing Barbies and talking about
Disney movies.
Yes, I can't wait to be a mom. And there is no, there's such a beautiful, beautiful thing in being a mother. And I adore my mother friends. I grieve with them and their loss of identity as they navigate new motherhood and things like that, but also recognize they have a beautiful family of their own. But we have this life script where you go to college and then you get married and then you have kids right away. And for any of us who have deviated at any point, it has been kind of scary because I don't really have people to look up to that are that vocal and out about not having children. And over the past few years, I've seen a lot more of it come into media. There's a lot more women, from Chelsea Handler to Seth Rogen even, talking about it, that there is a different life to be lived. And so I do think we need to elevate and hold up voices that are different, and that it's not good or bad. It's just more options always make us feel more spacious. So can we give our young people more options for who they can be?
And I think right there, right, it's not good or bad. For some reason, there's this pitting against each other that society creates because the traditional path of having children is what you're supposed to do. So if you're not doing that, in your own words, it's like you've chosen this rebellious road. Versus instead of giving it those terms of rebellious or, the off the beaten path, why don't we just consider it just another lifestyle? It's another chosen life. And I've had that happen to me. I remember, mentioning this, that, I don't want to have kids. And literally I've had someone tell me that, well, I'm judging you hard right now. And I said, wow, that judgment, I didn't say anything in that moment to that person, but I just internally just having actual compassion and empathy for that person, because I said, wow, this is a wound that you're carrying. This is a wound that you have that you're trying to project onto me, and there's this inability to just understand that it's okay when someone else makes other choices. What are ways that you think that someone can be emotionally sensitive to individuals who are choosing to not have kids and who are, maybe you're reflecting and thinking, I think about it as when I'm with my friends and we're talking about our, in our 60s or 70s or what we're thinking about doing and, hitting 40s, you start now thinking about that point in life. Yes, friends who have kids are thinking automatically about what it's going to be for them. And they're almost assuming that they're going to have grandkids.
Oh, and, it starts early.
It's that assumption there when their kids are only 10 and 12 and they're like, yeah, well, when I have grandkids, I'm like, well, you don't know if they actually are going to choose that path or not.
Yeah.
And they look at me with aren't you scared of being old and alone? And I was like, I promise you're going to probably end up joining my compound of friends who are going to live in the same area. And you're going to be looking at that as my kids are off. I'm an empty nester. I've got nowhere. What do I do now? You're going to come back and be part of this community of friends that are going to support each other.
Yeah. And, you talk to anyone in senior living and they'll tell you the busiest days are, the day before Christmas, Easter, and maybe on the person's birthday. The stats don't show that our elders are taken well care of. I mean, in some cultures it's there, but largely how we support our elder community is really hard. And I think that's something that we should all be just a little bit more realistic about. I think also to recognize that people's choice to have children or not have children isn't always based on this, I want someone to take care of me. We find people that are not having children by choice actually have put more thought into their reasons why they don't want to have kids than many of the people who had kids put into thoughts around whether they wanted them or not. And most people will say, oh, well, you just don't like kids. And it's like, actually, some of us love kids. We love our being an auntie and things like that. But the why we haven't had children can range from, I don't want to pass on generational trauma, to economics, to the environment, to politics, to I just like my hobbies more. So I think with anything you want to learn more about, to be inquisitive about it. If the door's open to discuss why someone hasn't had children, asking them what goes into it is a beautiful question to ask.
You really nailed it in the head. I mean, I could say for my own personal self, growing up as an Indian and, in the South Asian community, it is ingrained in you since you're 5 years old that you're going to one day get married. And I would absolutely, in my 20s, I was obsessed with the idea that I had to get married. I wanted to have 4 kids. I wanted the white picket fence house. I wanted the whole 1950s idea, right? That's what I grew up on and thinking that I'm going to have. And it wasn't until my early 30s where none of that had happened for me yet. And I was about 32 or 33. And I sat down with myself and I said, wait a second, what do I actually want? Do I want to have a life where I'm surrounded in and I'm obsessing over getting into a relationship just so I can have a child and start then because the biological clock is ticking and all of those other things and the pressure points that they put on you, where I've seen so many individuals who rush into a marriage because they so badly want a family, and then their decision making on how they choose their partner suffers. And ultimately that relationship also ends up suffering. Not to say everyone is that way, but there is a good proportion of, couples that realize that they weren't actually as compatible as they thought they were, because when you're in your 20s, like, who sits down and thinks about that piece? And it wasn't until my 30s where I thought about, what do I actually want from my life? And what is it that I can create for my life? And one of the things that I have learned for myself was I'm a macro thinker. I'm a big picture person. And instead of having a kid for me, what if I was able to create a career and have the wealth where I could actually impact multiple kids? Maybe I was able to do something for foster care system. Maybe I'm able to do something for, adoption agencies, able to actually make influence in the policies and in the things that are affecting our day-to-day lives. And this is where I'm so curious about when you think about the work that your clients have done, and even for your own self, having chosen to be child-free. I know from a client of mine who does legacy work as well, estate planning, is that typically in the family dynamics, the individual who ends up taking on majority of the ownership and responsibility of even managing the family, the parents, the uncles, the kids and nieces and nephews, and making sure everything is good, is actually the ambitious, the driven, the type A executive woman who gets guilt-free. She is the one who ends up taking on majority of the responsibility anyways to help maneuver everyone else. So what would you say in those moments, like to that person who is thinking about this, who is right now in their early 30s, who's considering this? What is that, that they should be considering for themselves? Hi, friends. I have a favor to ask you. If you're enjoying these episodes, then I'd really love it if you could subscribe, leave a review, or share it with your friends and family. Your words help others discover that the stories and these episodes exist in the perspectives that we're exploring over here. And the more that we can grow, the more feedback that we get from you through those reviews, the more we can make sure that we're creating meaningful episodes that you want to listen to. You have no idea how much this helps and how much I appreciate you for doing this. So if you don't mind, whether it's following us, subscribing, hitting the button below, if you can leave a review for us, or if you just share this with your friends and family, the episodes that you think that they would really resonate with, it means more to us than you can imagine. Thank you so much.
Lots in there. I completely agree with you on so many points. That's that kind of text that we get as a child-free woman, that tends to be the eldest daughter without kids that ends up taking care of mom and dad. And whether that be good or bad, but if you were to work with the Child-Free Wealth team, they would talk to you about how to plan for that and how to actually start mitigating any of that kind of responsibility that may fall onto you. But as it relates to, the personal choice around to have kids or not, I think, the analysis you did was a beautiful one, and mine mimics it in so many ways, where energy and motivation and time and my life here on this earth as a mortal being is finite. And if I have to choose strategically how to make the biggest impact, I chose early on that my biggest impact is going to come at a much grander scale than having one child. And I knew that one child would equal a certain amount of time and energy and financial support and things like that. And I trust that my future includes continuing to be a mother to many people. I've been a mother in many capacities, not the traditional I gave birth, but I feel like I play a motherly role to many people. And I hope always to support children. I love children, but I knew that I would be most scalable and impactful by doing it without children.
I think that's one piece where there's this idea and notion that if you're child-free, that means you're selfish. And that means that you're only in it for yourself, when actually there's a high percentage of women who are actually creating a lot of philanthropic impact and impact just within their community because they do have that space and time to dedicate to those bigger missions that someone who has 2 or 3 kids is bogged down with activities and doesn't have that necessary space. Not to say they won't when their kids are older, but those women are able to do that. I'm so curious that when someone is on this journey and they're starting to think about, okay, I've made the decision that I'm going to be child-free. I now need to think about, what does that look like for me? What do I need to consider? What is my planning look like? What would be the first 2, 3 steps that someone should consider?
First and foremost, I think so much of our life, given that we live in a capitalistic world, revolves around finances. I think getting a really clear picture of your financial picture is important. And if you were to engage with an advisor, ask and ensure that they're fiduciaries and that they're fee only, and then ask them how your plan is different because you're child-free. Their answer should be that it's substantively different, or they'll figure it out, because that's the right answer, is to get some clarity on what do you need to earn given the life that you have, so that you know at what point can you start doing the work you really want to do and it not be about the money. And that's, to your point, kind of how people can start really giving back. 2, because we're not having children, there are planning components to this. It means we do need to think about how we age, how we do it with health, and how we do it with the financial support that we need. And because we don't have the traditional family to presumably take care of us, as it relates to the work I do, having a plan in place, especially in our mid-40s, for long-term care and kind of the retirement community lifestyle that we want to live in, begin thinking proactively about kind of having the list of teammates on the bench that can step in to support you is really what you should be building.
What does that mean?
In terms of, do you have a great financial advisor? Do you have a great doctor? Do you have a great estate attorney? Do you have someone that is senior care manager that can help you start thinking about what aging in place may look like, making sure that your health is happy, things like, your health is good. So making sure you've got the teammates around you, and that's, we're a few years off from that, but we're both thinking strategically about our futures. If you don't feel, and I'll speak just not from lived experience, I'm not disenfranchised from my family, despite being a queer woman. Many people in the LGBTQ plus community are estranged from their families and have real worry about, if my family doesn't support my lifestyle now, how can I trust that they'll act on my behalf when it comes to emergencies or to death with dignity? And so identifying your estranged mother as your POA, your medical POA, someone that may need to make decisions on how you die, can be really conflicting. And so we do need to be thinking about making sure our estate planning documents are done, and that we have either a trusted fiduciary that you can get through Childfree Trust, act on your behalf, or individuals that really know and respect your plan for what it means to be incapacitated or potentially to have passed away.
Yeah, that is definitely something that I think about too, is that even if you're not estranged, but you just have difference of opinions and you have different perspectives within your family. I have a brother who's a little bit more conservative than I am. Like, he's still moderate conservative, but and we have a lot of like-minded things, but do I want him at the end of the day responsible for certain things? I don't know, right? And vice versa. So it's really looking at those pieces that are where you have to really take into consideration. I almost think about what you're talking about is like a company will have a board of advisors. And in the same way for your life, you're trying to create a life of advisors.
Yeah.
And individuals who are really there for your best interest without that bias.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel really lucky. I live in Bozeman, Montana, and I've thought much like you said, Dr. Payal, of like, who are these women and men around me that are my go-to teammates, that are on call if I need it. And I have a great doctor. I've got a great PT. I've got a great, all these people that therapists, everyone. And it's that, to me, I feel like is been a really crucial part of making sure that I'm aging well and healthy, is that I've got experts around me that know me and cherish me and support the lifestyle that I'm living.
What can society and families around us, what could they learn from the way that a child-free community defines love, connection, and contribution?
I think to move past the immediate judgment that it's a selfish act, and instead let the actions of the child-free community speak for themselves. Child-free people are some of the highest donors. You'll see child-free women climb the corporate ranks much faster and higher than women without it or with children. And that's, for a variety of reasons that I think if we can look at and see what can happen for a woman's life or a man's life, or to be able to not have children, the impact that they can have is huge. And I think that is probably the best lesson that I would encourage people is let actions speak louder than, immediate judgments towards the lifestyle.
What I'm really hearing throughout our entire conversation, and the theme that I'm really picking up on, is purpose. Is that there's purpose that goes beyond the individual. And regardless if your purpose is defined by you having kids, and even then, that your purpose is bigger than that, because you're trying to think about, how do I want my kids to then contribute to society? And for someone who's child-free, that purpose just shifts in that sense of what contributions can I make to society to create a world where my nieces and nephews and the next generation can feel safe in? And what does that look like? And there's an objective that you can have as a third party to the world, I sometimes feel, being childless, that allows you to step in and say, like, because they're just in the thick of things with what's happening, here's my way of creating a little bit of a safe haven. And would you say that from thinking about a child-free individual who decides to then think about their purpose and how do I want to then contribute to society? How do I want to give to society? Does that even mean it doesn't have to be philanthropic? It can even just start with, what does it look like in my community? What does it look like? Maybe I go back to elementary schools and create gardens in there because I love gardening. So let me create gardens for these elementary schools. So now kids can start learning how to garden. It's going back and educating, being a teacher, all of those different things that can give you purpose. But what do you find in all these years having worked with and having clients? What do you find is the purpose that a lot of them create for themselves?
As you talked, it just kept coming up that, passing judgment on people's lifestyle is where we get ourselves into such messy waters on both sides. And assuming we know someone's lived experience and that we know better than them is also where we get into muddy, icky waters. I truly believe that more people, if given the opportunity, space, and time to find alignment with who they are and how they want to move and navigate through this world, the quicker our world will heal. I truly believe that if we can let people have space and the opportunity to really make judgments that are right for themselves, more people are going to be in alignment and this world will feel different. And I think, unfortunately, the traditional life script that America has put on us, from consumerism to capitalism to all, to society, we're not given a lot of opportunity just to pause and evaluate if that's really what our heart truly needs as alignment. And so I think for people instead to just ask themselves, like, what is it that I truly want? And even if it's not giving back at all, there's no judgment around that. It's be the person who you really are meant to be while you're here. And I think we'll see a lot of difference in our world.
That's so beautifully said, because it really does, again, come back down to compassion and empathy. And it's just get curious and ask that individual, right? Like, I understand that you don't want to have children. So how was that process for you to make that decision? Even recognizing that someone isn't making that decision so just matter of fact, one day they wake up and decide, I guess I'm not gonna. It's not a decision about what dinner I'm gonna have. Like, they really have sat with this, thought about it, been intentional, because they're also shedding those narratives that have been woven in. So the level of guilt and the level of even that, am I going to regret this decision in the future when I can't go back to it? Those are all things that a child-free person really takes into consideration. Yeah. And so looking at that as an opportunity to connect. And I think that what you're just talking about is really building a bridge between the two and not looking at it like we're living these two completely alternate worlds, but more so that, hey, how can we be a support system to each other? How can we come together and look at the fact that we all want to live in a safer world? We all want to live in a world that is protected. We want to live in a world that is kind. So what does that mean, and how do we reflect that back in our day to day?
You're onto something here. And I think it takes a level of, I think, confidence in yourself to begin to not judge so hard. And that's where, again, we just get into ickiness when people really don't know themselves and have a lot of judgment on themselves, they project. But to accept that, the more diversity, and not everyone will agree with this, but the more diversity that we have in the world, the better, always. More diversity is always a good thing. And I think people should be proud to talk about their experience or not at all. I don't go to my friends and ask them why they had kids, remember, why is never a good question. It puts people
right. It creates defensiveness.
Yes. You always want to start with the how or what, the who, versus the why. But, the more dialogue we can have, the more examples of people living proudly and comfortably and safely, and the better we can do for our younger people. And, what I crave is more child-free elders ahead of me showing me what a life script could look like. I have no idea what 60 is going to look like. I think it's going to be really fun. Like you, I'm talking to my girlfriends about communes and places we can live together. But I will admit that there's also fear. My partner and I talk frequently about, do you think we'll regret this? Because we are of the childbearing years. And although neither of us have ever been called to biologically carry a child, we do wonder, will we regret it?
And I think that's just such a natural part of life, right? There is plenty of people who make decisions and they later regret it, or who accidentally end up in a situation and realize how much they actually love it and, are happy with the decisions that they have made. I definitely think that my decision wasn't necessarily intentional, and it wasn't accidental either. It was something that just was in that moment. I had an opportunity to reflect, and it just came to me that this, I need to think about this and consider this. And it takes years to get to that place of acceptance. And I think that that's that part where when we judge hard to someone else, it's really our own internal woundedness, our shame, that we are so afraid of, confronting ourselves. And so I love the fact that there is this now conversation that is being happened, and that you guys are normalizing what it means. I mean, I remember at the podcast movement conference when we met, we're sitting right next to each other eating, and it was the last 5 minutes of the evening, and finally talked, and you mentioned this, and I was like, oh my gosh, because it is something where when society has treated this particular group as the leftovers, or they don't matter because they're not procreating, so they're not contributing to society, right? There's that idea. So it's just okay, it doesn't matter what they do. That you can't help but have that somehow conditionally be consciously, unconsciously, subconsciously, woven into your own behaviors, and then how you end up treating yourself, to the point where I don't think many people who are child-free are considering what you and, what you're doing at this organization, a Child-Free Trust, where it's oh yeah, that's right. I do still matter, even though
yes,
I'm not contributing. And I think that piece is a missing piece that needs to be normalized, that you guys are definitely doing.
Yeah. And I think from a business perspective, anyone who's in charge of helping run an organization, there is a missing piece here of how do you help identify and support the audience of yours, the 25% of the audience that don't have kids. There are consumer products that are needed. There's ways in living environments, from real estate and housing developments, that can be geared towards child-free. There can be communities geared towards it. There should be more books and podcasts and speakers, TV shows. So much is ripe for the language around child-free to come, and for people to see themselves as, you're right, this does change my life. And you're right, I do want to hear from more child-free people. You look abroad to Japan and other Asian countries are really actually monopolizing on this, because their child-free demographic has been rising. And there's consumer products, there's living arrangements, there's, a solo living communities, things like that. And in the US, I think it's just, we're kind of fundamentally tied to this idea, one, of procreation, but two, of traditional family structures. But from a business perspective, folks, the child-free community is ripe for some offering too.
All those entrepreneurs, get on this. I want to end it with one final question of, if you could reframe one thing about how society sees people who are child-free, what would that be?
It changes from what I think I would have originally answered this question at the start, but we've talked so much about it that I think passing on the judgment of them and this assumption that you know what went into their decision and that snap judgment that they're selfish is something I hope society can move past. Because remember, every person's story is unique. You never know what someone has just lived through that day or that year. And to make a quick snap judgment of knowing why someone may find themselves at this place in their life, I think the world would be better off if we could pass on that.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful answer. And I think to add to that, if people gave that spaciousness to what you had mentioned earlier to those that are child-free, they'll actually find very generous and very giving individuals who are very passionate about giving back to the society in a bigger way. And that is sometimes a good portion of why someone has decided to stay child-free, so that they can find other ways to give back like you and I have. Yeah. So thank you, Maddie, so much for coming on and talking about this really important topic. I think we touched the surface for sure. And I definitely would love to have you back where we can go even deeper into what does it mean to normalize this? What is that, those opportunities? What is the opportunity for families to consider, during the holidays, for example, right? And looking at when there's weddings happening and other things that are happening in the way that that individual is treated in those dynamics, all of those things play a role in what it means to be a child-free individual in a society that's built around family. So thank you so much, Maddie, for being here. I would love for people to be able to connect with you, learn more about Childfree Trust. Where can they find you?
Yeah. www.childfreetrust.com is our official website. Please go there, sign up. We will launch January 5th of 2026. Me personally, I'm on LinkedIn, Maddie Roche, Roche. I would love to connect with anyone that wants to continue the conversation. And Dr. Payal, this has been a total gift. I'm so glad we ran into each other, and I trust we will have more conversations in the future.
Definitely. Thank you so much.